Welcome back to the Perek Project. I'm Gila Ross, host of the Power Up podcast, and in just a few minutes, we look at the incredible insights for our lives. Whether you've been following along or dipped in or out or just jumping on, don't worry, because each episode is standalone. And in this episode, we're going to look at the secret to relationships and what makes them last. So what's the secret to building long-lasting, successful relationships? So the Mishnah tells us it's actually very simple. It says that any love that is based on something, when that thing is gone, the love will be gone as well. If two people love each other for what they get from each other, whether it's beauty, whether it's wealth, whether it's something else, the minute that's gone, the love fades as well. What's an example of such a dependent love? So the Mishnah brings an extreme example. Amnon and Tamar were children of King David. They were half brother and half sister. And Amnon loved Tamar for her beauty, and once, under the guise of being ill, he asked her to come and tend to him, and while she was there, he forcefully used her to satisfy his lustings, and afterwards his love for her, his passion, turned to hatred. Why? Because he didn't love her, he loved himself, and she was a means to satisfy his own pleasure. And it's the same thing if you think about it. When you sit down to a delicious plate of chicken and you say, I love chicken. We don't really love the chicken. If you love the chicken, you'll let it run around in the garden. We love ourselves and we love how we feel when we eat chicken. So what's the flip side of it? The flip side is for a relationship to be long-lasting, it has to be based on an unselfish love, a love that is based on each other, not based on a thing. There has to be a mutual respect and concern for each other. For example, if you think of it, parents' love for their child is unconditional. It's not based on anything, and therefore it lasts. So what's an example of such a love? So again, the Mishnah gives an extreme example, that of David and Jonathan. Now, Jonathan was the son of King Saul, and David was going to become the king and take what should have rightfully been Jonathan's position as the king of Israel. So they should have been rivals. And Jonathan was his righteous person. He was loved by the people. And yet he loved King David. They loved each other for who they were. So much so that even though Jonathan's father, King Saul, hated David and tried to kill him more than once, Jonathan saved his life. Now, it's important when we look at this is that most relationships, we just discussed here two extremes, but most relationships are on a spectrum. But if we want to deepen our relationships and develop real relationships, the way is to remove any of the selfishness in the relationships and put the other's interests over one's own. What's very interesting is to note is that God's love for us is not based on anything, and that's one of the ways that we know that God's love for us is enduring. Now, we all know that even in the best relationships, conflict happens. Unfortunately, there are different reasons why people can argue, but we're told that any dispute, any argument that is for the sake of heaven, for the sake of discovering the truth, will have a constructive outcome. What does that mean? It means their words will be lasting and productive, and the people that are arguing will still be good friends. That means that if somebody, an example of this is if someone gives constructive criticism to another person for the right reasons, out of concern for the other, then it will achieve its goal and find its way into the other person's heart. So again, the Mishnah gives an extreme example of this, an example of Hillel and Shammai, who argued a lot about different ideas within the Talmud. And their disputes are written down and studied until today. Why am I calling it extreme? Because they were extremely for the sake of heaven. They were extremely for the sake of discovering the truth. Most of us today are nowhere near that level. And therefore, we should stay as much as possible far away from conflict. It's interesting to point out that internally, our battle with our lower self is ultimately for our own good. If we think about it, that battle lasts our entire lifetime. We can never sit back and say, I've won. I have succeeded over conquering my lower self. You know why it lasts our entire life? It's because ultimately it's for our good. It stretches us so that we can choose good and we can become better. The flip side of this, and I would venture to guess that most of the arguments nowadays is because our ego gets in the way or the desire to be right. What happens? Unfortunately, those sorts of arguments are extremely destructive. And again, we learn about an extreme example of Korach, right? Korach was the cousin of Moses, and when he found out that both Moses and his brother Aaron were chosen for top leadership positions within the Jewish people, Moses as the leader of the Jewish people and Aaron as the high priest, he resented, he was jealous that he wasn't chosen, and he incited the masses. He appeared to be of them as a champion of the people. I'm there for your good. But really what he did, he incited them to rebel against Moses, and it had the most catastrophic result that he and everyone that got involved was swallowed by the earth. So for us, obviously, very similar to understanding whether a love is selfish or unselfish, it's on a spectrum. Most of us are on a spectrum. So how can we tell if the argument is for the right reasons? So one of the ways to do it is if the people that are arguing are still friendly and getting along, that's a clue that they're arguing for the right reasons. But if there's anger, if there's resentment, if there's ill will, then that shows that they're arguing because of ego or the desire to be right. And we have to be aware of the dangers of conflict and try and remove that desire to be right for the success and the peace of our relationships. So we've seen that unity is powerful when people unite for selfless reasons. And even when they argue for selfless reasons, there is power in that unity. But that unity can be used for the positive or the negative. And when someone uses that for the positive and they influence others to do good, they are given an assurance that they will not be the cause of sin. And that's like the principle that the reward for a mitzvah is a mitzvah. What does that mean? It means when someone starts on the path of good deeds, they are rewarded by more opportunities for more good deeds. Our actions influence our following actions. So even if we do something small that's good, that brings in its wake more opportunities to do good things. And on a deeper level, it's human nature that our conscience doesn't like it when our words and our deeds don't match up. So someone who is a role model and inspires the public is going to be motivated to live up to the role. So it's a very good incentive for us to try and influence others to do good. The flip side, though, is that someone who influences others to sin, to do bad things, they're not going to be given the divine help to repent. And this is only fair, because it's not fair that someone who causes others to harm themselves spiritually is given the help to repent while his victim's suffering. Obviously, the person can repent, but they are going to have to do it on their own. So we see that what we have a responsibility, not just for our actions and how they're going to influence us further along the line, but what we cause others to do, for better or for worse, we are responsible for. So the secret to long-lasting, successful relationships is becoming more selfless. And we have to be cognizant of the power that we have to influence others Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you benefited from this podcast, please share the word and subscribe so that you get future episodes. Thank you for spending your time with us today.